Okay, so what we have here are three watches. We have this Pulsar. I forgot the model number. It's no longer made. I think it says 533525, but I don't know if that's it. But anyways, so this is this Pulsar, which is a Tier 1 watch. And I just keep this around because it was my watch that I owned before I got into watch collecting, before I caught the bug, so to speak. This watch cost about $55 on, I think I bought it on Amazon, and it's a quartz watch, and it stopped working probably about a year ago, maybe a little less even. So it actually, the battery lasts. I might have changed it actually. I bought this probably about 9-10 years ago. The battery lasted 5 to 8 years. I can't remember if I changed it or not. Anyways, you know, it's plastic, crystal, very scratched up. It came on a cheap leather strap. And then we have right here, we have the Seiko Black Monster. This is the second generation of the Seiko Black Monster. This is a true Tier 2 watch. These cost around $200 now. They vary. I've seen them as low as about $175 to as much as $230, depending upon, you know, the fluctuations in the market. So this also has a Hardlex crystal, which is it's a higher grade plastic mineral crystal. And it has an automatic movement, in-house Seiko automatic movement. It's their base movement. Actually, this might have, I'm not sure if this upgraded from their base, the same movement as the Seiko 5s. I'm not sure, but it's an in-house automatic movement. It's hand winding and hacking. This is new on the Generation 2. And it's got a metal bracelet. And so looking at these two, this is a watch that cost, you know, about 4 times as much, maybe 3 times, because I bought this so long ago. It's probably more expensive. This the equivalent of this. You might not be able to see it on this video, but one of the differences is there's a little bit more care in the Seiko. You know, the bracelet is brushed a little bit. The case has some brushed. There's some brushed and polished. It's nothing special, but it's just, you know, it's a little bit nicer. The design is a little more sophisticated and interesting, and it's got a bracelet. So, and I think one of the differences is the automatic movement. So one of the big differences between Tier 1 and 2 would be usually Tier 2 you start getting automatic movements. There's lots of quartz and kinetic movements in Tier 2, but you start getting automatic movements. There's probably some Tier 1 automatic movements too, but it's a step up. And I think also just in terms of design and overall build quality, you're getting more in Tier 2. You're also, yeah, so that's the basic difference. You know, it's you know, even looking at the case, you can see how the Pulsar is just sort of, you know, a shaped, it's just a piece of metal from a print, you know what I mean? It's not, there's no polish, I mean, it is a little polished, but there's no real finishing on it. It's just basically a chunk of metal that they cut, right? And the Seiko is probably the same, but there might be a little bit more. You can see there's brushwork down the side of the case. All right, so now let's take a look at this. This watch here is my Orient, I think it's technically Orient Air Diver. It's been called the Revolver because of those little pegs in the bezel. This I would call, this is sort of a higher Tier 2 watch. You could even call it a transition Tier 2 to 3. It's similar in quality to the Seiko Sumo, I would say. Although it's not quite as refined. It's got a better bracelet though. And it's also got an in-house movement. It's an older movement. It's not hacking or hand winding. It's got a little power reserve. It's a really cool, weird looking watch. But aside from that, you start seeing some significant differences. If you look on this watch, you see the case, the sides is very nicely polished, and then you have brushed finish on here. The bracelet is brushed. It's not. It's much better than the Seiko Sumo. or I'm sorry, the Seiko, yeah, the Sumo bracelet too. But it's much better than the Black Monster bracelet, which is, you know, it's a cheap tier 2 bracelet. This one's stepping up. You got a thicker clasp. You got little orient. You know, often starting in tier 3, they start putting little, you know, engravings. You know, I mean, it's a stamped engraving. It's not like somebody hand carved that. Another thing I've noticed is the case backs start getting a little nicer with tier 3. So you have a nice engraved case back. This song is kind of annoying me. I'm listening to Incognito, which is a really long-lasting acid jazz band that started, I think, in the 80s and is still going today. They've got dozens of albums. Acid jazz / soul. You know, they were kind of contemporaries of Jamiroquai. I think they came out before Jamiroquai, when acid jazz was at its peak in the early 90s. But they're still around. And anyways, so this also has the equivalent of a Hardlex crystal, so it's not sapphire. It's very rare once you go to tier 3 to find watches that don't have sapphire crystals. So you can start seeing the transition occur here. You can start seeing between tier 2 and tier 3. There's just a little bit more refinement, just a little bit more attention to not cutting corners, better bracelet, that sort of thing. The case is a little better designed. Similar movement. You know, you're not going to find a huge amount of difference within tier 2. All right, so those are again, here's tier 1. Here's tier 2A and tier 2B, you could say. So now let's take a little step up. Let's look at tier 3 watches. Now I have a few what I would call tier 3 watches. 3 to be exact, all of which I'm going to sell. We have the Citizen Signature Flyback. We have the Hamilton Railroad. And we have an Oris Diver's Date. These are all tier 3 watches. And actually you can see they give you a little bit of a range too, because I was saying tier 3 is around 500 to 2,000. This one costs about 700 new. This one costs about 1,000 new, and this one I think is more like 1,500 new. So you get a little bit of the range within tier 3. And when you get to tier 3, there's a couple differences. One, of course, the movement is generally a higher grade movement. Not always, but generally. You start getting modified Swiss movements. These both have modified ETA. I think this is a modified Salida. I'm not sure. I was talking about that in another video. The Citizen is actually an echo drive, so it's not even an automatic movement. You also, I would say the defining feature of tier 3 watches is that it's the first tier where no corners are cut. So for instance, in this Monster, you have a cheap bracelet. You know, cheap bracelet and clasp. This one, you have the plastic crystal. And the Seiko Sumo is a good example of why I don't consider it a tier 3 watch, or rather, it's a tier 2.5 watch, because it's partially tier 3, it's partially tier 2. The Seiko Sumo has, you know, like the case and the movement are tier 3. Like, it's a very nicely done case, and the movement is high quality. But the bracelet and the clasp and the crystal and the bezel, they're all more tier 2-ish. Tier 3, you start seeing like... So like, for instance, let's take this one. Let's start with this one. Just a high quality, nice leather band. This one has some amazing design work on it. I've done videos. I'm not going to go on it too much, but just some incredible angles here. So a lot of work goes into something like this. You know, just having this. It's a busy dial. Some people won't like that, but you know what you see here with brushed, polished, brushed, and then these very, very elegant. You know, I'm looking at this. Do I want to sell this? It's such a cool looking watch. So this. Yeah, so you can see there's just greater refinement in terms of the craftsmanship of the case design. Although, again, this is an echo drive movement. So in a way, you could say a watch like this with a nicer movement could become a tier 4 watch. It's really got, you're not going to do much better than what this is. I mean, the metal case, the design, it's really a sophisticated piece. It's a nice leather. I think it's an alligator leather, but I'm not sure. I don't know my leathers very well. I think that pattern is actually just alligator. No, it's crocodile. Genuine crocodile. Might be a keeper, folks. All right. So here's this Hamilton Railroad, which is an automatic movement. You can see the movement, and this one has a beautiful... Hamilton does great case backs. The movements are actually kind of pretty the way they make them. They're not, like coaxial movements, but they're nice. This one has this beautiful big sapphire crystal. Really lovely case design. Really great leather. Really, it's very thick and strong. It's a great leather band. This is a modified ETA movement. I don't know how, I forget how it's modified, but it's definitely a really nice piece. This is actually a good example of, this is a PVD watch, but it's a much higher grade PVD. It's much thicker than you'll get from a tier 2 watch. I've had tier 2 PVD watches, meaning the black coating, and it scrapes off, and then you see metal. This would do that too with a big enough scrape, but you can just tell it's much thicker. It's really got a nice black polish. It's a really beautiful piece. I'm going to sell it. I'm not wearing it. It's a little bit big for me, but it is a really nice piece. And then the Oris, which for me, I think this is one of the best Swiss dive watches you can get for $1,000 or less. You can find these. This one's no longer in production. They've replaced it with the Aquas or Aqui. I actually prefer the Diver's Date to the Aquas. I like they have these sharp points, more like a teeth-like look for the lume markers. It's got a guilloche dial. You can really see here, this was my first quote-unquote real Swiss piece. It really opened my eyes to a finer level of design and casework. I had owned, before I got this, I had owned the Sumo and the Orient Saturation Diver, and this felt like a step up. It might be just personal taste. It might be I like the Swiss look. I wouldn't say, I no longer have the Orient Saturation Diver. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a better watch than that. It's a little more refined, I think. The Orient Saturation Diver is a little more in your face. But yeah, again, this is a big step up from the tier 2 watches in terms of the brushwork, the finishing on the entire case. The bracelet is a nice thick bracelet with a good clasp. You can also just see on the dial, you've got these beautiful lume markers with the metal, the engraved metal, or the I don't know how you describe that. It's just, when I got this, it felt jewel-like. It was like a whole nother level of jewel-likeness. You get a little bit of that from the Sumo, but this is a more complete picture in terms of that jewel-like quality that you really only start getting with tier 3. This does not have an in-house movement. You can see the movement in the back. It is a modified movement. I don't know. I think Oris does do some modifications. I don't know exactly what the movement is. It doesn't say anything. It just says Swiss-made Oris High Mech. So they kind of claim it as their own. It's not a finished movement. There's no. I mean, I think on the rotor there's a little bit of finishing, but behind it's pretty bare bones, simple movement. Really cool case back too. Boy, I'm again having second thoughts about selling this, but again, I'm not really wearing this watch. All right, so there you go. That gives you a sense of tier 1, 2, and then 3. Okay, it's greater degrees of refinement. You can really see and feel. I mean, I think it's one of the biggest jumps. You can really see and feel the difference between these two watches if you have them in your hand. And actually, I would say one of the biggest, perhaps the most tangible difference is the bracelet. between a Tier 2 and a Tier 3 watch. You just get a much higher quality bracelet with Tier 3. And this is why I really do think Tier 3 watches are luxury watches. They are really nice pieces. They don't cut the corners. They're just making nicer pieces, okay? All right, so I'm going to pause here. All of this, I realize, is a preamble to what Jeff was actually asking for, so that will be coming next. All right, one moment. Years, I can't remember if I changed it or not. Anyways, you know, it's plastic, crystal, very scratched up. It came on a cheap leather strap. And then we have right here, we have the Seiko Black Monster. This is which is a Tier 1 watch. And I just keep this around because it was my watch that I owned before I got into watch collecting, before I caught the bug, so to speak. This watch cost about $55 I think I bought it. Okay, so what we have here are 3 watches. We have this Pulsar. I forgot the model number. It's no longer made. I think it says 533525, but I don't know if that's it. But anyways, so this is his Pulsar on Amazon, and it's a quartz watch, and it stopped working probably about a year ago, maybe a little less even. So it actually, the battery lasts. I might have changed it actually. I bought this probably about 9-10 years ago. The battery lasted 5 to 8. Second generation of the Seiko Black Monster. This is a true Tier 2 watch. These cost around $200 now. They vary. I've seen them as low as about $175 to as much as $230, depending upon, you know,